in honor of Refuah Shalema for Tova Bas Chava. She have a speedy recovery, and thank you for family for sponsoring tonight's class. Okay, so in honor. Hold on a second. Let's bring up the text here. I just want to say that when I was looking when we were looking and was talking with Stricky, he'll be on soon, of starting a new Masechta, a new tractate for after Sanhedrin. So we were discussing what Masechta. So Megillah seemed like a light Masechta, and some told me maybe we should try something more complicated. But the truth is that I'm finding it actually more, in a way, much more of in-depth Masechta, because you have it's about halachas. It means the laws of Purim, where you talk about Sanhedrin. Kind of these are not laws that a lot of us deal with on Hashayla, on questions of how we go about dealing with Sanhedrin. You go to the Rav, you go to the rabbi. But in the laws of, when it comes to Megillah, there's a lot more material because of the question in the halacha l'maisa, the law. How exactly are we supposed to figure the Megillah? At least in the first pages that we're learning in our Hebrews. So we're on the mamish on the top of page Gimel Amud Beis, and we were discussing about how do we navigate between studying of Torah and other responsibilities that should come up. For instance, reading the Megillah, or the service, like we found that we finished off with the story that Joshua had two things. One was the study of Torah, that they weren't studying Torah at night when they should have been, even while they were fighting. And the second thing was they missed out one of the sacrifices because we learned that the Kohanim weren't there, and relationships at night. So Yeshua was kind of being admonished, and the question is, when did he come? For what issue did he come? He says, now I'm coming. I'm coming now for the issue of Talmud Torah. So we see the Talmud Torah, the studying of Torah, is more strict than, or more important, or the lack of studying of Torah is more of so to say of something to be upset. That the angel had something to admonish about, more than missing the service of the sacrifices. So the Gemara answers. So we see that it's more important to that the service comes second to, so to say, the studying of Torah. So the Gemara says it's not a lokash, it's not a question. Ha dirabim v'ha diyachid, right? That we finished off last week that when do we say Torah is more important is when it's a communal study. All the Jewish people were not studying because they were fighting. Where the house of Rebbe says that they would stop the Torah for Megillah. That's because it was more individuals. It wasn't communal. It wasn't the communal studying of the whole Jewish people. It was just the house of Rebbe, although there could have been a minyan. Okay, so now the Gemara says, like if you finish off the statement of the sages and of the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rebbe is referring to Torah studied by an individual, which are the individuals of house of Rebbe, which is less significant than the temple service. So they would stop for the temple service, but they wouldn't stop for they would stop for the temple service, the studying of Torah, but that's only because it's individually. So now the Gemara asks a question like this. So we're mid idea here. So the Gemara continues with the Yachid Kal. Do you want to say that the Torah study of an individual is lighter, so to say, than the communal study, and therefore the house of Rebbe would stop learning Torah vis-a-vis, so to say, the service? V'hasnan, we learned that nashim b'moyed ma'anois. Okay, this is the law in mourning. This is really this subject is brought up in ideas of laws of moyed katan, Hebrews. So the laws of moyed katan, which is deals with also the mourning, how we deal with mourning if it comes out on Yom Tif, right? So we have noshim b'moyed ma'anois. So there's different ways of showing our mourning. So it says in women, on the holiday, they could be ma'anois avloi mitapchos. So they could laminate in a way of mourning, but they may not clap. We'll see what clapping means. Clapping as a way not of enjoy, but clapping as in a way of mourning. So you clap your hands on your head or on your chest. So, mourning the loss of someone you love. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, that's the opinion of the Mishnah, of the Tanna Kamma. Rabbi Shmuel says, Im hayu semuchais lamita if they were close to the bed, so they're right there in front of them, so then mitapches they could even clap. Berashe, that's on Moyed, that's on the holiday. However, Berashe Chadashim, on the new month, Chodesh, or Chanukah or Purim, Ma'anoisim tapchis b'zeh u'b'zeh avaloi mekoininois, so they may laminate and clap on both groups of days, meaning on Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, or Purim, but they may not wail. Wail is the third level of mourning. So that's because of the holiday of the new month and of Chanukah and Purim. So you could clap and laminate, but you cannot mourn. You can't wail. Okay. Why does it say nashim, women? Because it seems like, and if you learn the Gemara in Moed Katan that talks about this more at length, it seems like that the women were more of the expressive emotionally when it came to mourning of the wailing and clapping, and they even systemized it. It wasn't just that it was, you can't control someone crying, but it was actually kind of organized, where they had a method of doing it, and that this was a way the woman would mourn. So how could you? So if you have, you have a halacha, right? How do we set up the system? So if it's the moyed, according to Tanna Kama, you could laminate it, but you can't clap. And the Rebbe Shmuel says you could clap if you're by the bed. And Chanukah and Purim, everyone agrees that you could do both laminating mourning in a way of we'll see that's kind of where the one woman leads the others, and clapping, but you can't wail. So it's obviously kind of organized. You can't, if someone's just wailing, it's not that much, clamping your mouth down, but kind of it was a way of organized mourning. So ma'anis, what is ma'anis? Is hesped al meis, is a eulogy. So they could do a eulogy on the Chag, but Rashi says, but you can't do the le'metapchis al libam. They can't clap or bang on their hearts, which was a way of, again, mourning. But on the Chanukah and Rosh Chodesh, you can't wail. What's the difference between when it says ma'anois, which is inoi, and what's the difference between kina? That inoi shekulin oinois ka'achas kina achas oimeres v'kulin oinois achreah. That the difference between ina, which Rashi says, the kind of eulogy on the mace, is that everyone does it together. And wailing is one achas oimeres, one says something and all answer after her. That's a kind of more of an emotional, I guess, response, which even on the new month, Chanukah and Purim, one should not do. Again, we're talking about, obviously, in a way, we're some sort of way of system. That's Rashi's opinion on what it means to clap. The Tosfos says that, and we're going to see in a second, it's a short Tosfos again. We're going to learn some of the short Tosfos that are kind of applicable. Tosfos says, Ma'anois is, what does Ma'anois means? What is a hesped? Kulen oinis ka'achas, they all do it together, like Rashi says. Mekoininas, wailing is achas emeres vashar oinis. One kind of leads on. We're getting closer to Parshas B'Shalach, right? So we want to know, how did the Jewish people say the Shira? There's all of opinions. One said and one finished. People answered like Hallel. So here we have the one woman would kind of say something and the woman would answer, and that's called wailing. Metapches yad al yad al yerech al panim. So Rashi says the metapches means beating the heart. Tosfos means say kind of also clapping in a way of hand to hand, which is not in a way of clapping as in cheering, but clapping as in a way of agony, or on your thigh, or on your face. Obviously not in a way to hurt yourself, but to mourn. Actually, it doesn't say this here, and I didn't see in the Mefarshim, but we have actually a little mocker for that. Hold on a second. He says, the Ritva also says that they would bang on their head with their hands. There's a little mocker, for those who remember a little bit of Chumash. It's not too many weeks ago in Parshas Bereshis, right? So when Lemech kills Cain, right? Lemech is a descendant of Cain. And God tells Cain, after Cain kills his brother Abel, right? God says to Cain that in the future generation, 7 generations, he's going to be killed by someone. And who kills him? Lemech, who's blind. And it says when he heard that he killed Cain, he clapped his hands. And in the process of clapping his hands, he killed his own son, which was his eyes. He took his son to use him as his eyes for his hunting. He thought he was hunting an animal, and he was hunting his great-grandfather Cain. So we see clearly that, like the Tosfos is saying, that clapping the hands is a way of mourning, that's what Lemech did. He clapped his hands together. I believe his name was Lemech. Okay. Matpachis clapped their hands in mourning. So this action involves hands either clapping on the hand together or clapping the hand against another part of the body. In other words, the face, chest, or thigh. So he quotes the Ritva. Nashim, so he says, Nashim b'maylis ma'anis, the Steinsaltz says, on the intermediate days of the festival, we're talking about Chol Hamoed, obviously. So women may lament. So he says, on the intermediate days of the festival, women are permitted to lament together in unison, but they may not clap their hands in mourning. On the new moon, Chanukah and Purim, they are even, he's quoting, I think, the Aruch HaShulchan and the Shulchan Aruch. It says on the Purim, and they are even permitted to, on the new moon, Chanukah and Purim, they are even permitted to wail responsively, one woman uttering words of lament and the others responding after her. Here it says, okay. Respond after. All this applies so long as the deceased has not yet been buried. However, if one hears of the demise of an immediate relative, meaning someone close to you, father, mother, etc., after he has already been buried, the practice mentioned above are permitted on the day one receives the news. We know what's called the day of hearing of, let's say you find out your parent died. So the day you hear it is your day of kind of mourning. These restrictions are limited to the passing of an ordinary person. However, in the case of the death of a Torah scholar, it is permitted even on the intermediate days of the festival to lament and engage in other mourning practices in the presence of the body of the deceased. Nowadays, these customs of mourning are not practiced. We don't see people banging their hands. However, the halachic mentioned above also apply to eulogies. One is not permitted to eulogize on these days except when the Torah scholar passes away, and then only in the presence of his body. So he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan, Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea 4015. Okay. So basically, the nutshell, Rabbi Steinsaltz says today we don't have all these customs, but we do have the eulogies, the hespedim. The hespedim are only permitted for a Torah scholar in their presence of their body. Okay, means when you're standing in front of them. Okay, so what's the question? Rabba bar Huna, Rabba the son of Huna says, Ein moed b'fnei Talmud Chacham. All these laws of the Chol Hamoed of how you can and you can't mourn doesn't apply to a Torah scholar. Koshkin Chanukah Purim, so even more so that you're allowed to properly eulogize and mourn on the Chanukah and Purim. So what do we see from here? And we're talking that we said that the Rebbe said that the Torah study comes. You have to stop studying Torah to listen to the Megillah, and we answered that that's the Torah study of an individual. Here we're talking about even if one person dies, then Purim, so to say, goes to the side, and we eulogize the Talmud Chacham. So how could you say that the Torah study of an individual doesn't come before Purim? And here he says, so he doesn't say that. So it doesn't say clearly what's the question. Because so what? I mean, you were talking about eulogy. We're talking about reading the Megillah. So the idea is that, like Tosfos is going to say, and even though if you eulogize the Talmud Chacham, the scholar, you're not going to be able to read the Megillah. Because Koshken Chanukah Purim, he says, Shemuter laspidam, you're allowed to make a hesped, a eulogy for a Talmud Chacham, even though at the expense of the Megillah reading, you're doing the eulogy. And we just said the house of Rebbe would stop learning Torah for the reading of the Megillah. But here we see that for one person who's a Torah scholar, we push off the Megillah. Talmud Torah, Chomer Megillah. So from here we clearly see that Torah study comes before Megillah. So why does the Gemara say that the house of Rebbe would stop learning Torah to listen to the Megillah? So the Gemara's answer is obvious, right? What's the Gemara's answer? The Gemara's answer is Kavod Torah Kamart. We're not talking about studying of Torah. We're talking about honoring the Torah. When you're eulogizing a person who studied Torah, that's called Kavod Torah. That's called the honor of Torah. Kavod Torah D'Yachid Cham. For the honor of the individual, like Rashi is going to explain, is because and others explain is because it's not this Torah study that they're studying now. It's the Torah study they studied all the years that they were alive. We're Talmud Torah D'Yachid, but the studying of Torah now for the individual is more lenient. So if you have a question of honoring Torah, the passing of a Talmud Chacham, then yes, like Tosfos says, it pushes away the reading of the Megillah, because the Gemara doesn't seem to explain the question. The Tosfos adds in that the eulogy comes in place of, is pushing away the studying of the reading of the Megillah. Nevertheless, but that's the cover Torah, it's honor of Torah. But the studying of an individual, then you have to close the books and go to the Megillah. Talmud Torah de Yachid bitul bin lemudei kal me'avodah upurim. To study Torah and to therefore stop bitul, to stop your learning, to listen to the Megillah in a group, like we said, according to the Ritva, R'raiv Am Hadras Melech, or according to the opinions of the idea of Pesumi Nisa, it has to be with a lot of people. I just want to mention what we spoke last week, that there's two opinions that of what's the idea of reading the Megillah together. Why couldn't the house of Rebbe kind of schedule the time differently? So the idea is that the Ritva says there's a halach of Reiv Am Hadras Melech. I just want to explain what I said then. Reiv Am Hadras Melech is that we like to do things with big groups. Reiv Am means a big group is beautifies the king, meaning God. So that's a law that has nothing to do specifically with Purim. That's a law of any time you do something, it's better to do it Reiv Am. Right? People like to go to the Birchat Kohanim on Yom Tif when you have thousands of Kohanim. Why? That's why you can go to Shul and have two Kohanim bless you. Because there's a concept of Rov Am Hadras Melech. When there's a lot of people, that beautifies the king. So that's a din in Rov Am Hadras Melech, that you stop learning Torah so everyone should listen to the Megillah together. According to the opinion, the idea that's Pirsum Nisa, it's a law in Megillah. The Megillah has to be read because the more people actually publicizes the miracle of what the Megillah is about, which is the story of Purim. Okay, so let's see. Not everyone agrees with Tosfos' understanding of the question, that fact that we eulogize in the place of the reading the Megillah. There's other opinions of the Rashash and others, but it's not. We'll go with Tosfos is good enough for us to continue, obviously. So I just want to say the Sfas Emes. Oh, he's going to quote it here in the notes. So what's the difference between Kavod Torah and Limud Torah? This respect for Torah and the study of Torah. So it says the reason for this is that the honor of Torah is even for an individual that must be shown to a Torah scholar is for the Torah that he has learned in his life, whereas that honor shown for the Torah study of an individual is only for the Torah he's presently engaged in studying. So Sfas Emes says when you have a question of you're in the middle of a Tosfos or a Maimer or an Halacha, and you have to close your Sefer to listen to Megillah, you're closing what you're learning now. But we're talking about the Kavod Torah, the respective Torah is not just the Torah that the individual learned right before he passed away, but we're talking about the Torah study a person spent a lifetime studying, and therefore that comes before the reading of the Megillah. Okay, we're going to continue now with difficult questions of, again, like I said, when we're talking about Megillah and what we've learning so far in Megillah, a lot of halachic questions. So here we have a question. Amar Rav says like this: Pshitali, it's obvious to me. Avoida umikra Megillah adif. Like we said, if you have to do the service of the temple, or you have to read the Megillah, Megillah comes first, and then even more so, that Torah comes before. That Torah also comes. Megillah comes before Torah. How do we know this? Mid Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, like we said, we proved before from Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina that it says mishpacha mi mishpacha, means even the Kohanim have to stop what they're doing to listen to the Megillah in unison with the group. And it's also obvious to me that Talmud Torah Mikra Megillah, that if one is studying Torah and it comes time for the Megillah reading, that we stop learning and Mikra Megillah Adif, the Megillah comes first. Midisamchu shal beis Rabbi, from what the house of Rebbe said. That the house of Rebbe said they stopped learning for communal reading of the Megillah. And there's a famous story we're talking about, like what's better or not, but it's this famous story brought down in Sipurich Tzadikim. That middle of the Suda, one year, the Baal Shem Tov's father, the holy Baal Shem Tov's father, his name was Yisrael, ben Eliezer. So his father, Eliezer, was in the middle of the Torah, middle of the meal, and he stopped and he opened up a Gemara. And the reason why, they found out that in heaven there was a kind of a critique, that everyone was so involved in Sudas Purim that no one was learning. I don't know, means no, but it wasn't the people weren't in Australia today. There's Jewish people around the clock, everywhere in the world. So it's Purim by one person, it's not Purim by the next person. But that's the story. No one was learning Torah, and so Rebbe Eliezer says, no one was learning Torah. He stopped his meal and he started to learn Torah. But when it comes to the reading of the Megillah, so he says, so it's obvious to me that the Megillah comes before Torah study from the fact that the house of Rebbe, again, Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, the great author of the Mishnah and leader of the Jewish people, would interrupt their Torah study for the Megillah. Rashi says, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina the Darish Mishpacha. Like we said before, that Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina learns from the word Mishpacha. Why does it say Mishpacha? Ear is to teach us about the cities, but Mishpacha means to teach us that the families of the Kohanim, meaning the Kohanim the Levites and the Kohanim have to stop what they're doing in the avodah in the service of the temple to read the Megillah. The question is like this. Also, he says, Talmud Torah meis mitzvah. Let's say you come to a question where you could study Torah, or you have to help a mes mitzvah, a person who died. What does it mean, a mes mitzvah? A mes mitzvah is a person who died without any relatives, no one to take care of that person, he or she. And so the person's lacking a family to bury that person, or you come across a body just lying there in the ground. Right, the famous story of Rabbi Kiva who dragged him. So the halacha is that a mes mitzvah is kind of, if it's a normal place, you bury them right where you find them. But you have someone has to do the burial. It takes time, right? It takes effort and time. So if you're studying Torah and you come across an opportunity for a mes mitzvah, so the Torah says you can't say, well, it's not my obligation. It's I have to study Torah. No, you stop mes mitzvah if you have to stop learning and help bury the deceased. Midatanya, how do we know this? Because there's a mission, the Brisa that says Mevatel Talmud Torah Leitzayis HaMesach Naskal. That we interrupt our Torah study if it comes to a question of burying the dead, or for the Hachnasa Skala when a bride is being taken to her wedding. Avoida u'meis mitzvah adav. And it's also, he says, it's obvious to me that a Kohen who has to do service and it comes across an opportunity for the mes mitzvah to bury someone who has no help today. A lot of times you'll get a message that's in today, WhatsApp groups, etc. where you say that you have a mes mitzvah would also include sometimes, when someone says there's no minyan, right? We need a minyan to say Kaddish in the burial. So people say, well, I'm learning Torah. So if there's someone else to do it, it's one thing. If there's no one else to do it, there's an idea of mes mitzvah, help bury this person properly. So here we have avoidu mes mitzvah. I'm not going to pass in that's the halacha for a kaddish, but when we need a minyan together to bury someone. So avoidu mes mitzvah. It comes to service of the temple, or to bury the dead. So also a mes mitzvah comes first. How do we know that? From milah chaisai. We'll put a pin on that for a second. What that means for the sister. We'll see how we learned that. Before we get to the la'achaisai, so I'm going to go down. Tosfos says, we're going to see in a second, that's not just for a mes mitzvah, meaning a mes mitzvah to say that the person is a deceased that has no one to help them. But Tosfos says, Hu adin l'chol meisim sheba'olam. Mevatel Talmud Torah lahitziam. Just like we have to honor the bride, it does. If you look at the lashon of the brisa, it doesn't say mes mitzvah, like tzas hames. If a mace is going out, if someone's going out to be buried in honoring the dead, even if it's not a situation of a mitzvah, meaning that person has no family, you go out. The Tosfos says mevatel Torah lahitziam, and just like the kala. I just want to say, here we have the Tosfos, the text right here. Mes mitzvah de la dafka mes mitzvah hu din l'chol meisim shba'olam mevatel Talmud Torah lahitziam, that we stop learning to honor the dead. Because in the case of the sacrifice, then it's only a case of mes mitzvah, that you stop the sacrifice for the specific a person who dies without any family and someone needs to take care of him or her. So therefore we add that also in this case, but it's not really mes mitzvah. Any mace, Tosfos paskins, again, Tosfos is saying this lahalacha, the law, that if there's a situation that you could go to now it doesn't mean that a person has to be hooked up to the Chevra Kadisha WhatsApp group, and every time there's a levaya to show up at the levaya. That we don't expect that. But we're talking about if there's a situation where you have a reason to go to the levaya, and you're saying, I'm learning now. No, then go to the levaya, go to respect the dead. But even surely so the cases where the person, it's a mes mitzvah, where it's a mitzvah to be in this situation, the person needs help. We're not going to do the next Tosfos. So let's see. We're going to get back to Chosom in a second. Let's see. Reb Steinsaltz. A corpse with no one to bury it. That's what a Maseches Mitzvah is. The definition of Maseches Mitzvah is a person that no one's there to help the dead. It is an important religious obligation to take part in a burial of the dead, in general, full stop. If the deceased has no friends or relatives to bury him or her, everyone is obligated to assist in the burial. According to a halacha, a corpse with no one available to bury it acquires his space. That's talking about, obviously, in a place, not if someone passes away in their apartment or in their house that you dig up onto the bed and bury the person. We're talking about that's in a case where a person is found to be lying on the ground. In other words, a body must be interred where it was found, provided that it is an honorable location. It has to be a normal place. Otherwise, the body must be buried in the nearest cemetery. The religious duty is so important. This religious duty is so important that even priests and Nazirites, which we're going to learn about in a second, even if you're a priest, meaning a priest is not supposed to become impure. Even today, the Kohanim do not go to a basic forest. Or a Nazirite is not allowed to interrupt their vow of being a Nazir, and part of that is not to become impure, so they don't become impure for anything. And the Kohen is less strict than a Nazir. Nevertheless, if a Nazir is walking down the street and sees a Maseches Mitzvah, the Nazir has to take care of it. You can't ignore it. Who are ordinarily prohibited to come in contact with the corpse may bury a deserted corpse if there's no one else available to bury it. Obviously, if the Kohen has someone else to bury it, the Kohen doesn't have to jump in. Same thing with the Nazir. Similarly, the obligation to bury this corpse takes precedent over nearly all other religious obligations. To deal with the person who's dead, you can't say, well, let that person lie there. I'm in the middle of doing X, Y, and Z, Torah study, what have you. If I'm a Nazir, I can't become impure. No, all that goes to the waste. Right now, you have to deal with the dead body. Again, a Nazir, I just want to say, a Nazir is more strict than a Kohen. A Kohen who passes obviously becomes impure. A regular Kohen becomes impure for mother, father, or lachaisai, in your sister that's unmarried. So, but a Nazir is different. A Nazir doesn't become impure for anyone. So let's see what's the case of a lachaisai. Lachaisai is like this. Okay, I just want to first bring, before we go to Rabbi Steinsaltz, because Rabbi Steinsaltz doesn't bring the whole pasuk. The pasuk says like this. By Nazir, let me get it up. By Nazir, it says like this. A Nazir is again a Nazirite. So he says, Akol nafshis meis la yavai. One pasuk says, anyone who dies, he can't go, the Nazir, a woman can also become a Nazir, the Nazir cannot go to become impure by even someone who passes away. The Lashon is Kol nafshis meis la yavi, no matter who that person is. Harikol meisim mashma, obviously means anyone. Then the verse continues. The next verse says, the Torah spells it out. Not for your father, not for your mother, not for your brother, not for your sister, could you become impure if you're a Nazir. The question is, why does the Torah have to repeat itself? It's not about the intensity of the law. The verse says no one. So no one is no one. Why do you have to spell out father, mother, sister, brother? No one is no one. So it's obviously an extra verse. So why is there this extra verse? Is the drasha to teach us something. What is the drasha? So the drasha, the Gemara says over there, the aviv, if your father is, you cannot become impure, but you can become impure for a Maseches Mitzvah. So just the initial idea that you can become impure for a Maseches Mitzvah. Again, a Maseches Mitzvah is a person who dies who has no one to care for it, especially if you find them in the street, on the road, and there's no one else that could help. So the Nazirith, for your father you can't, but for the Maseches Mitzvah you can't. So why does it have to say for the mother? We already covered that issue with the father. A person say, okay, that's only if I have one intensity. I'm a Nazir. What about if I'm a Nazir and a Kohen? Kind of double. So that you still don't become impure. But you do become impure for the deceased who has no one to assist it. So why do we say the brother? It's coming to teach us. Even if the person who's walking down the road is not just a Nazir, but is a Nazir and a high priest. The high priest has much more intensity. The high priest doesn't even become, even if it wasn't a Nazir, can't even become impure for his own father and mother. For his brother, he doesn't become impure, but he does become impure for this Maseches Mitzvah. So what's the lachoisai? What's the sister? What's the fourth thing? Which is what he mentions here. Ma Talmud Leimer. So let's first see the Rabbi Steinsaltz comes in. The the derivation of this halacha may be understood as follows. The verse states, with regard to a Nazareth, he shall not become near a dead body, which is what we said, Akol nafshis meis lo yaveh, which is in Bamidbar 6:6. Teaching in Nase, right? Teaching that he is forbidden to become ritually impure by becoming into contact with the corpse. In the following verse, for his father, for his mother, for his brother, for his sister, he shall not make himself ritually impure. So it repeats itself for them when they die. The words for his sister are superfluous, as it would have sufficient to mention his father's mother and his brother in order to teach us this prohibition. Applies even to the close relatives, unlike a priest who may become ritually impure for his immediate relatives. Therefore, one can derive from the language of the verse that for them, in other words, the relatives, he's forbidden to become ritually impure, but there are other instances in which he is permitted to make himself ritually impure. In other words, for a corpse with no one to bury, a mes mitzvah. Since the verse is mentioned for relatives, it may be derived that even in the case of a high priest or one who is on his way to slaughter the Paschal lamb, he may nevertheless become ritually impure for the sake of mes mitzvah. And this comes into our case, that a mes mitzvah overrides avoda. Because what is the fourth case of lachaisai? The Tanya we learned, lachaisai. What is it? The fourth addition to the verse, lachaisai, for his daughter, his sister. If a person is going on the way to sacrifice his or her Paschal lamb, and you have to be pure. If you're impure, you can't do the Paschal lamb. The whole idea of Pesach Sheni is Tameil Nefesh Adam. And now you're about to do your sacrifice, and you're walking up to the temple, and you see someone, God forbid, lying on the floor and needs burial. And you look around, no one's there to help you. And even if there was, now you're not a Nazir, so you don't have any exemption. You know better than anyone else. You have to put down your Paschal lamb, which means you're not going to sacrifice it, and you're going to bury the person who's dead. Even if you're doing another mitzvah, a son has to be circumcised on the 8th day. You're about to circumcise your son, and you're on the way to the bris, and you have to start shoveling the mes mitzvah. And because of doing that, you may not circumcise on time. You become impure. You have to understand the idea of Milah. You don't have to be pure to do Milah. So let's see the Rashi.
Good question.
Go ahead, Avi.
What is the difference then between a mes mitzvah and an onen? Is there actually is an onen still more restrictive, or it sounds like almost everything that would apply to one is applying to the other?
Onen is a family member a person who's mourning the day of mes mitzvah midiraisa, is the day of the death. Onen is a way of mourning. It's the laws of mourning. Here we're talking about what do you mean by onen? You're talking about a person who's mourning. The laws of the mourning. Here we're talking about the laws of caring for the dead.
Well, the idea that while you're in onen, you basically push aside all positive time-bound mitzvot.
Because you have that, you have to deal with the deceased. Now, first of all, the difference in the onen is that the onen is only the family, provided there's a family to take care of the person. Mes mitzvah is not. You don't have an obligation to mourn the dead. There's also the element of the mourning before the means even if everything is taken care of and you can put on film, you don't put on film. It's not. I mean, although you're supposed to be using your time to take care of, but it's also the oinen is also part of mourning. Whereas in the case of the mes mitzvah, it's not mourning per se. It's part to deal with the mes mitzvah. But and also the difference in mes mitzvah and oinen is only responsibility for the family as long as there's a family. Mes mitzvah is anyone who could take care of it. And then you have a question as who comes first. Like if you have a kohen and a regular person, or a nazir and a kohen, or a kohen and a nazir and a regular person, all the questions that come into play. But if there's no one there, the nazir has to come in, has to jump in and is your question like that? Why isn't every dead person considered a mes mitzvah?
That may be one way to say it. I just generally are the restrictions, aside from the situation that lands you in either category, once you're there, is it basically practically the same set of
rules? Yeah. But I don't know if there's any halachic differences as far as what you should and shouldn't do. I mean, putting on tefillin comes, mes mitzvah comes first. Any other mitzvah say gets pushed to the side in order for them to participate in helping the mes mitzvah get his or her burial. So here Rashi is going to quote also what we learned from Rabbi Steinsaltz. He says, is talking about the verse is talking about a nazir. There's a general says that he can't become impure to anyone who passes away. That includes everyone. The Torah goes and spells out father, mother, brother, sister. So we learn from this although this person has two things, which is both he's a kohen and he's a nazir. For his mother, he wouldn't become impure, but he's metam from meis mitzvah. La'achiv is coming to add that even if he's a more intense kind of restriction, which is a kohen gadol, high priest, and he's a nazir, then la'achiv le'itame, but he's metam meis mitzvah. And the only thing that is exempts the nazir from keeping his or her purity, means not to become impure, is the mes mitzvah. What's the last verse saying? We already covered everything. We covered a kohen, a nazir kohen, and a kohen gadol. So what's the fourth description of his sister? It's not just to be poetic. If a person is on their way to do the sacrifice of the Pesach, and again, you can't do the sacrifice of the Pesach if you're tamei, you put away the Paschal lamb and you bury them dead. So here he's talking about that if a person has an obligation to do a bris, and you hear that a dead person's that your brother, your sister passed away, you have to become ritually impure for the deceased in the place of the bris again. So just hold on a second. The case of the bris is a little bit more complicated, but just give me a second. Okay. So Rashi explains, and the case refers to anyone who's on his way to perform these mitzvahs. Just as a Nazareth would become ritually impure for the Metz mitzvah, so too would someone on his way to perform these mitzvahs. See the Rashba. However, Rashi in Zvachim 100a explains that the case is where the individual who is both the high priest and the Nazareth is on his way to perform these mitzvahs. See the Tosafos Rosh, who addresses the apparent contradiction between Rashi's explanations. Okay, so the question is if it's talking about anyone on the way to doing a Korban Pesach, or the high priest on his way to doing Korban Pesach. It means the Rashi says that we've covered everything. So the fourth case is not talking about a priest Bechlal or a Nazir even. It's just talking about a regular person who's on the way to do the Korban Pesach. Or are we talking about a high priest that has even something more important to do, is that the high priest has to do a mitzvah, an additional mitzvah of a positive commandment of doing the Korban Pesach. Amarta lo yitamas, so the Gemara continues. It says you shouldn't become impure. I would think that just like I can't, if I'm a Nazir or if I'm on the way to a Korban Pesach, I wouldn't become impure for my sister. According to Rashi, that's only talking about so too I wouldn't become impure for a meis mitzvah. Talmud laim lachayse u'den mitam meis mitzvah. Amarta lo yitam k'shem she'ein nazir mevatel nizrus l'tam l'kreivav kach hu ze lo yivatel mipischoi. So he says. So the answer is no. That you have to be mevatel your Pesach to bury a mes mitzvah. Okay. Even a high priest, a Nazareth, and one who's on the way to circumcision his son, or the slaughter of Paschal lamb, is required to abandon the mitzvah and become ritually impure in order to bury the mes mitzvah in an unattended corpse. Again, he adds what he said before. This is the opinion of the Rashi in Zvachim that says even if it's a high priest and a Nazir and on the way to do a circumcision or the Paschal lamb, you still put that all aside to bury the mes mitzvah. Okay, so this he says is all obvious. We just discussed the obvious. This is all obvious to Rava, that this is the law, that a mes mitzvah, a dead person, becomes before anything. But boy, Rava has a question. What about Mikra Megillah mes mitzvah? What about if you're running to hear the Megillah in a communal setting, and you come upon a person who needs help being buried? Which one, who comes first? Megillah. We said Megillah goes before the service. Megillah goes before Talmud Torah, studying Torah. Maybe Megillah goes before also burying the dead. So do I say Mikra Megillah Adif Mishum Pisur Minisa? So here we see the first time the Pisur Minisa element, that to publicize the miracle possibly overrides the necessity to deal with someone who has no one to care for his burial or her burial. Maybe Pisur Minisa is so important. And this is basically based on this Gemara, is why those who say it's not the idea of a brave Am Hadr Smelach according to the Ritva, because that for sure wouldn't be the reason why you would stop mes mitzvah. But it could be the idea of Pisur Minisa is so important to publicize the miracle of Purim overrides the necessity to care for the dead. That's the thinking of Rava, maybe. Or do we say no? Mes mitzvah adif. Mes mitzvah even comes before publicizing the miracle of Purim. Why? Because of kavod habris. Respecting human dignity and giving a person the dignity to have a proper burial and not be lying there on the ground overrides even the necessity of publicizing the miracle. According to the opinions, that's the reason why we stop everything else. We stop learning Torah. We stop the service of the temple because it's important to publicize the miracle of Purim through the reading of the Megillah. But human dignity, that comes first, even overrides the necessity of publicizing the miracle. But after he asked the question, he said, no, I understand the answer. Meis mitzvah adif, surely dealing with the dead who have no one to help attend it comes before the reading of the Megillah to publicize the miracle. The Amar Mark, as we said, Godul Kovid Habriz Shedoiches Loisa says Shebetoira, that even a prohibition. Here we're talking about a positive commandment, right? A positive commandment of reading the Megillah, or a positive commandment of studying Torah. But even a prohibition over the idea of human dignity comes first. What's the prohibition? So he says, the Rashi says, you cannot, if you see something in lost object, Shabbos Aveda, right? You see a lost object, you can't ignore it. Isala means from like lahalim, to kind of pretend like you didn't see it. But there's a halacha, the Rambam brings it down, that if it's an elderly person who's walking down the road and sees a lost object, and it's not respectful for him to deal with it. Let's say you find a cow, and you have to schlep it and get all muddy. Then you're a respectful person. So then the halacha says you don't have to deal with the lost object and return it. So we see that there's a loisa say of not, but when do you? But nevertheless, for mes mitzvah, even a zaken, and it's not the fikvaydi, has to deal with the mes mitzvah. So we see clearly that even in a place where the Torah say that there's a connection to prohibition. So according to Rashi, there's no prohibition here. There's a connection to prohibition. The prohibition is to ignore a lost object. But in the case where it's not respectful for you to deal with it, Rambam defines what does it mean respectful in that? Would you deal with it if it was your own thing? If you had a cow that was lost and you found it in the mud, would you schlep it out because it's your money? Or would you ignore it because it's not respectful for your position? So if you wouldn't deal with it for your own things, you're not obligated to deal with it for others. But in the case of mes mitzvah, we don't have that leeway. So they see clearly that even with the Torah kind of in the connection of a prohibition, the Torah says that a mes mitzvah comes first. You can't ignore it, and so therefore cover the bris because human dignity comes first. Let's see. The Reb Steinsaltz is going to explain it. Okay, he says like this: reading the Megillah and tending to a mes mitzvah. Although reading the Megillah takes precedence over other mitzvahs like learning Torah or the avoda, of the service of the temple. Burying an unattended corpse overrides reading the Megillah. Some say that this ruling isn't limited to unattended corpse, but even to one's relative who requires attending. Like Avi brought down the idea of an oinen, a person who has to deal with their own relative. The funeral of a Torah scholar has the same status as that of an unattended corpse. So says the Magen Avram, citing the Darchei Moshe and Or Zerua. There are those who rule that although attending to a mes mitzvah takes precedence over the reading of the Megillah, if one will not be able to read the Megillah afterwards, the reading of the Megillah takes precedent. The Ramah says that if you're going to deal with the mes mitzvah, you're not going to be able to read the Megillah, you're going to miss the time. Means if the question is, because we discussed this last week, that what about, means you could just let the people who are doing service, let the Kohanim do it later. So we say Pesur Menisa or Reva Maseches Megillah or learning Torah, if the teacher didn't. So here the question is, and is not reading the Megillah Torah study itself. But here, if you have a mes mitzvah, basically what he's saying is, hypothetically, in theory, even in human dignity, Megillah takes 20 minutes. I mean, you can read it fast, right? So you can quickly read the Megillah and then attend to the mes mitzvah. The mes mitzvah, no disrespect, is not going anywhere, right? So you could deal with it afterwards. So that's the opinion of the Ramah. Others maintain that even in these circumstances, an unattended corpse should be buried first. So this is the Taz, who disagrees with the Ramah and the Magen Avram. This, however, is only true with regard to unattended corpse. The reading of the Megillah is not completely abandoned in order to bury a regular corpse. It means, according to the Mishnah Brura, Shulchan Aruch, and Orach Chaim, says that the idea of pushing off the Megillah, even if you're going to miss the Megillah, is only applicable to a mes mitzvah. But to have a proper family burial, and you push off the burial so you could read the Megillah, even if it's going to be later, that's okay, according to the opinion of the Mishnah Berurah and the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, what's covered a bris. What does it mean, human dignity? The importance of burying a mes mitzvah does not stem from the mitzvah to bury the dead, but rather from the principle of human dignity. What Steinsaltz is saying is a very important point. The mes mitzvah there's the idea of human dignity, and there's the idea of the chiyuv of the obligation of burying the dead. The idea of burying the dead is a mitzvah. The idea of mes mitzvah it's not because of the burial part, but it's the human dignity part. And maybe Avi, this addresses your question. As it is a disgrace, because the covenant of bris is not the reason why the oinen. It's because you're the mitzvah of burial. So that maybe would be the difference. I don't know if there's a halachic difference and a practical. We're talking about the siba, the reason behind it. But rather from the principle of human dignity, as it is a disgrace to the deceased if his or her body is not buried. As for the negative mitzvah that is superseded by human dignity, both Rashi and the Reed write this refers to the cancellation of the positive precept of returning a lost object to its owner when returning the object would cause disgrace to the finder. However, many of the early authorities, like Rabbeinu Yonatan, understand that this is referring to the negative precept of do not deviate, meaning there's a halacha in a pasuk in Devarim 17:11 that says that you're not allowed to deviate from the rabbis. That's lo yisaseh. If the rabbis instituted Megillah, by not reading Megillah, you're transgressing the violation of the prohibition of not listening to the rabbis, because you're not reading the Megillah. So this is the prohibition. Mes mitzvah overrides that prohibition, indicating that the concern of human dignity surpasses rabbinic obligations and prohibitions. Some authorities maintain that the human dignity sets aside even Torah commandments, but only in a passive manner where one would be permitted to violate rabbinic prohibitions even actively. Okay, so it's in a case where rabbinically you would be able to do it. So the Raisa, you could do it in a way of passive. Okay, this is a shaila of what are the cases that a meis mitzvah overrides the halacha. Hold on, guys. I'm not sure if the page froze a second. Okay. I just want to say we bring down over here. Okay, so this finishes this. Hold on. This finishes this subject. What's going on over here? Hold on. Okay. So we have over here. So he says, let's go a little further. You have 10 minutes. Gufa, we learned before. Do you guys see the page still? No, hold on a second. It's not sharing the page. Let's see why. Let's try it one more time here. Just give me 1 second. I'll try. For now, we'll just end up stopping a few minutes early. Looks like my computer's browser is crashing. All right, sorry about that, Chevra. So I guess it says the news. Oh, here we have. Hold on. Give me 1 second. All right, doesn't seem to be wanting to cooperate. Yashkoch, everyone, for joining. Avi, I'm going to check a little bit more in detail about your question. I want to just go into, because I'm not certain about the Oinen part. But I'm not exactly sure about the Oinen part vis-a-vis the Bes Mitzvah. I'd like to check it more in detail and get back to you next class. Laila Tov, everyone, take care. Thank you for joining.
Thanks,
Hey.
Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
You're welcome.